Hello and welcome to another episode of the Business Spotlight series. My name is Claudia Thompson, and today I'm here with Daniel Jones, the founder of Jones Tutoring Ltd. And that's a private tutoring firm covering GCSE and A levels. Thank you so much for your time today, Daniel. It's really good to have you. And why don't you start and tell us how you got into tutoring?
Well, it's quite a funny story. I mean, education is something I've always been quite big on. I mean, at school, I was always the nerdy guy who you'd ask for the homework and that sort of stuff. But it was in year 12 when I fully sort of started to get into it because my friend Mia, who sort of got me into this whole idea of tutoring, she referred me for a role at a place in Southbourne, England called Connie Rothman Learning Trust. And they're sort of this big tutoring agency that they sort of act as a charity. And I got a role there. And I remember my first day, I thought I was going in for a sort of interview and just to sort of speak about what the role would be like. And on that first day, they sort of said, "Hey, we're going to put you in the deep end here, and we're going to ask you to tutor this student for GCSE maths." And I had never taught before. I mean, I was only just finished my GCSE, so it was sort of like this is a big jump. And the moment I sort of sat down, and it was the initial anxiety of tutoring, but once I saw the way I was explaining it, sort of you could see on the student's face, like, okay, this kind of makes sense. And from there, sort of every day I came into work after I think I was doing 3 days a week. After school, I mean, school is, it can be quite exhausting. But going to that job where instead of learning, I'm teaching, and it just sort of filled me with energy. And from that point on, I realized I want to be doing this. So down the line, I was at a job for about a year and a half. I left in sort of December, I think 2 or 3 years ago. And then from that point on, I set up Jones Tutoring because I realized I love this sort of opportunity. I like how I can set it up and I like the idea of helping students. So I thought, why don't I build that into something that I can sort of have a bit more control over and a bit more freedom with? Sort of, doing the shift from sort of 5 to 8 or whatever it was after school. It was enjoyable, but at times it could be exhausting. If I had you sort of mock exams, it was sort of hard to balance it. So setting up Jones Tutoring was like an easy option. And initially, it was sort of all in person type of thing. It was very hectic going to students' houses and preparing resources. But eventually, I realized, I mean, with an own business, you can sort of, transform it into a way that works for you and your customers. So we turned into a sort of a fully online based business where you can bring on a tutor quite easily and it's quite accessible and you can sort of vet them and make sure they're, high quality and they stand for the same messages. But also you can provide high quality without that cost of, I mean, even the pollution for the environment, right? You can have fully online lessons, and I think so that's how I got into it, and it's going well so far.
Yeah, and it's going really well. I believe you've got 7 tutors now, or 11 even.
Yeah, so it's about 11 shooters who
Yeah,
we have on call.
yeah, and so yeah, what would you say is your secret to growing from nothing to 11 tutors?
I think that the starting point is always having that pure passion. I know that's sort of the you know expected answer, but it really is having that idea of there's an industry you like the sound of, you've got a bit of experience in it. How can you take that to the next level? And for me, it's this idea of I call it the ESP initiative. It's education, support, and passion. It's the idea that in education at school, people find it boring because the big focus is around, hey, here's some information and we're going to test you on it in a few months. And students find it very easy to sort of just take that in passively and not really act on it. But when you start mixing the support, I mean, one of the things we focus on now is sort of brain coaching, how the memory works, how you can manage your time, your homework in a way that makes studying work for you. You make your time work for you, make your learning work for you. It makes it easier. And then the P is for passion, and passion is just the idea of, well, whenever you do something and you know why you're doing it, it makes it so much more easy for you to actually get down and do it. When somebody tells you, hey, here's 20 pages of a textbook, learn that. If you have no idea why you're doing it and it's not in your direct line of interest, it's hard. So we try and evoke a sense of passion in saying, hey, once you get your GCSEs, we can try and help you to your next stage, to applying to your next college, to applying to university, or even, to a sort of job and setting up a CV. So for us, what stands out is that aspect of actually mixing things in that students need to have, but not that they need to have for just a logical sense, but that they mentally need to have the support structure, the passion in place to push them. And I think that's why parents like us, and I think that's why we can continue to grow as a business.
Wow, and I absolutely love your passion that comes out of everything you
Really
say
appreciate it.
there. And where do you say, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Speaking of growth, what's next for Jones Tutoring?
I think my next big focus is sort of, growing the platform a bit more. I think with an agency style, the hard part is bringing on the people who are exactly the right mindset. I think with the ESP initiative, it's very easy to find people who are great tutors and who know the content well, who might have an MPhil or something in education. But one of the issues you find is they might not always know the support side or a passion side. So in 5 years' time, my goal is to have a community of sort of upwards of 50 to 100 tutors who I can work with sort of day to day, sort of overseeing that, who I can manage curriculums for and that side and bring them clients to. I'm actually looking at trying to turn Jones Tutoring into a bit more of an elaborate sort of business in one sense. Because with that ESP side, yes, tutoring is a massive part of it, but what about the people who don't need tutoring? Some students are very strong, very capable, and parents might say, hold on, he's getting a grade 8 or a grade 9. We don't really need a tutor. But that student might be in some ways be put at a disadvantage because they're not being trained on those support and passion sides. They might be naturally very talented, but they're not sure why they're talented or where it's going to go. So we're trying to branch out into sort of three ideas. The first one is the Jones Tutoring Agency, which is where I've got all of the tutors at the moment. And that's sort of where our main tutoring efforts come from. So that's what I bring tutors to and clients towards, and we sort of work out like that. And the next two sides I'm looking at bringing is at the moment what I call the Learning J. And that's a social media presence of where we try and train students in a bit more of a entertaining but informational way about how they can use their brain for learning and how they can optimize their sort of environment and the people around them in a way that pushes them to know why they're learning and take it further. And the third part is what I'm going to call education made simple. It's still sort of in the groundworks and in development, but I think education, we see it as very complicated. So we want to make it simple. And how do we make it simple? Well, we want to share with parents and sort of other key stakeholders, teachers and potentially officials in sort of the government and whatever. We want to try and help them in the latest insights around, cognitive biases. What are some things that students naturally go wrong on that we just for some reason don't correct? So I think those three sides are where I see myself in 5 years, especially with business. I think the growth is the growth potential is very high. It's just in 5 years, I want to keep acting on it and keep going to the next thing. But the end goal is to try and sort of reform the way education is viewed, especially in the UK in particular. Because I mean, there's so many students who go into school and they go in and out and they think the main thing is just, oh, I took some notes and that's about it. But it's not about that. Education is a massive chance for you to sort of test yourself. One of the things people rarely do is think, okay, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to push myself to be better. They see it as, oh, I want to get a better score than him, but I don't care if he beats me. If people see it like that, and that's really not the best way to see it. Education should be a platform to create students who sort of want to be better. And that's what I want to keep doing in the next sort of 5 years.
Fantastic. And one of the goals you had was to go up to 50 to 100 tutors. And what would you say have been your biggest learnings when looking at hiring staff or getting those tutors in place?
Of course. Well, actually, it was quite interesting because as I was starting a business, I also took a part-time job at a recruitment agency called the Taylor Group, who sort of recruit for sort of high-end investment managers and that side of the world. So there was a lot of recruitment effort I got from that. So I sort of knew that process of how to get candidates who you think are suitable. But from that point, the hard part was knowing, okay, I've spoken to this person, their resume, their CV looks fantastic, but how do I know that they're a right fit? And for us, a right fit is somebody who has integrity, who can actually look at a question and an answer and say, okay, well, it's wrong for this reason. And we want them to be able to say, okay, well, even though your answer was like 99% sure, I want them to mention that 1%. We can always be better, and we only get there by having the nudge. A big part of tutoring is, having someone who can push you that step further instead of just saying, okay, here's your information, just keep repeating that. So finding that in the tutoring process and when we bring people on, it was difficult. But one of the things we sort of began to do was in that interview process, sort of make a few mistakes on my end. If we have a presentation, have a small mistake and see if they correct it. It's a very small thing. It's very sort of sleight of hand. It's a bit cheeky, but it's a really good way to see, are they going to, correct me? Because if they don't correct me, how can I be certain they'll correct the student? And it's so important to have that because education isn't about you knowing better, it's about you being able to explain better to help them understand something hopefully better than you in the end. So I think with bringing people on, that was the biggest challenge, but I think we found a way around that, and it's worked out so well so far.
So you give them little tasks to do that basically represent what they'd be doing every day, and then see how they do it. Love it. Very, very smart. If you had to start again from square one in business, is there anything that you would do differently now?
I think it's interesting because I started it when I was quite young with the intention of just like, learning as I go. So in terms of, on a curiosity basis, I would keep that the same. But the thing I would change is definitely focus a lot more on the social media side. I think one thing that's very difficult with education is it's very easy to, have a parent come to you and say, hey, my son is kind of struggling. I want him to push him to be better and that sort of stuff. You can get clients quite nicely that way. But what about the students who they spend their time on their phone or an Xbox, whatever it might be, who don't really ever see an incentive to go towards tutoring? Our goal is to help these students. We don't always see it as a client thing. It's always more about that help. And if we set up that social media platform a bit earlier and try to grow that as our focus first, we could have helped so many more students, even if they weren't becoming customers. So the way I would have changed that is definitely start that a bit sooner. I think right now it's around 3,500 followers. But if we started it before, I mean, that could have been a lot more, right? And in terms of that, that's great for leads, for creating clients, but also the actual effects we want to have, we'd be having that on more people. So I think that's what I would have started before. And that's in terms of outreach and that side. But I also would have maybe created a bit more infrastructure. It's very easy for a tutor to write up a lesson. And that lesson doesn't normally have to be tailored, but there's a way that you can, create these guides and these curriculums in a way that they can be replicated easily, and then you can change a few factors to make it suitable for a student. The key thing is, I mean, one of the things we teach on is sort of active learning. Passive learning is something that a few sort of educational psychologists have found is like 30% less effective than active methods, sort of like when you're engaged in material, asking questions and sort of that side. So we try and force that in the curriculum. And I don't know if you've sort of looked over like a math curriculum for GCSE recently, but they're not always as engaging as they maybe should be. So I would have invested a lot more in that and set out first. But now that we've got it in motion, I realize, yeah, I should have done it a bit earlier.
Yeah. Wow. And you mentioned math there in a completely different context, but that's usually what comes up when I speak to younger or fresher business owners. They say, "Oh, I'm not good at math. I don't know how to look after my finances." What would you say to people that come and struggle around their finances in the business?
Of course, I think the most important thing that I found what was so useful when I started was just getting an Excel spreadsheet, any expense, any inflow, put it down. You realize, I mean, with time, everything becomes to fit in a lot more when you have a bit more information to use. If you were to open up a jigsaw puzzle and look at one piece, you have no idea what's going to go next to it. If you suddenly put 10, 20, 15 pieces in front of you, you can kind of see, okay, this goes with this. This isn't even relevant. I'm going to put it over there, and you can sort it out that way. With the finances, it's very similar. You first need to know, I mean, what are your main costs going to be? In tutoring, that's always going to be labor, and that's always going to be the software, and sometimes materials, but there's always ways sort of around that. But if you don't know that, then you have no idea what the things you need is. Will you need a loan? Sometimes it's a yes, sometimes it's a no. And sort of what ways can you finance your sort of business? But initially, it's sort of just, get your pen to paper, write down, I'm going to have to buy this. I might have to buy this. What are the alternatives? And when you do that, it's always quite good. You either get a wake up call or you sort of, feel better. If you see that your costs are sort of 10 times higher than what you thought they should be, you're forced to be creative. You're forced to say, okay, hold on, it's a lot higher than I'd want it to be. How do I get around that? In my context, I sort of started with quite a messy sort of digital infrastructure in the sense of where people would book versus where they'd have the sessions hosted versus where homework might be. And that was very messy. It was sort of, costs were quite high. And after a week or two, I realized, hold on, I'm looking at my spreadsheet. The numbers are not, adding up as they should be. So maybe I'm going to try and look around there. And, once we did that, that actually helped other parts of our business. We realized when you reduce your costs, you're doing that in some way that's going to shape the rest of your business. And more often than not, that's going to be a good thing. So my key advice is simply get your pen and paper, write down every number you can think of. You don't have to make it complicated, keep it simple. I think the best acronym I got for that is my economics teacher told me, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. If you don't do that, you're going to make it hard on yourself. So that's my key advice there.
Wow. Beautiful, as out of a picture, business picture book. This is how you're doing. And you definitely sound like a busy man. So let's talk work-life balance. Do you think that's even a thing for a business owner?
I think it really depends on the context of the business, right? In my life, there is a lot of stuff going on. The businesses it can be very hectic, but at times it's sort of you just have to think if you ever find your tasks being sort of hard to manage, just see. I mean, again, with finances, note down the things you have to do and balance them. I actually very recently began to learn a few skills around something called Notion, which is like a productivity software, and I realized it's going to take a while to learn, but if I learn how to use this, everything is going to come in a lot more sense. It's going to be more organized, and everything will be easy to manage. So in terms of managing your personal life, your work life, and social life, I think it's difficult if you want it to be. It's very easy once you sort of force yourself to say, okay, I'm really struggling to balance, going out with my friends and also having meetings with parents. And if you realize that, you're going to say, okay, well, I need to do that. I also need to do that. So you force yourself to find a way. And in my case, because this is something I'm so passionate about, a large part of my personal life is researching how I can make it better. And it's genuinely like a hobby of mine. I mean, I've got like 5 books in front of me now just around this. So for me, in terms of my personal life, I'm so sort of intrinsically into my business that it sort of is easier to balance. But typically, when I'm feeling less, within my business, when I feel a bit more overcrowded, it really is about sort of writing them down and organizing them. And the best way I do this is this thing called the Eisenhower matrix. It's sort of you list up what's important, what's urgent and not urgent. And things that are important and urgent, you do those first. You don't even look at the other list. And you say, I'm going to do that now. Once you do that, then you decide what you do next. And that's where you can decide, I'm throwing some free time, some social time. And from that point, it's quite nice to go on. But it can be a challenge. But again, you won't know how to get over it until you let yourself be a bit overcrowded at first. It's difficult, but it has to be done.
I love that you brought the Eisenhower matrix in there, because I have mine right here. So if
Amazing.
anyone watching this or listening to this and you'd like a template, let me know. I'm happy to send that over, because yeah, I find that such a useful tool. So what, from your perspective, are some things that people think running a business is like? So are there any common misconception that you come across a lot?
I think the main misconception is the idea of that I need to have the world's best idea to make this work. Some of the most interesting and successful businesses have come from something that isn't always a necessity. It's based off of an existing idea that you take to the next level. The best example of this is actually the other company I'm sort of working with called Worky. What they do is they sort of bring together a lot of already sort of existing ideas and they just take it to the next level. And they're so successful because of that. So your business does not need to be flashy. Your business does not need to be something that people look at and say, that is most high end and whatnot business. It just has to be an idea that has meaning to it. And that if I consume it, my life becomes better or easier, or it stays the same and doesn't get worse. Anything that's going to push your business and people around you or people who consume your product to having a better life or more productive life, then your business should work. Of course, there's certain businesses that are a bit more casual, something like drop shipping or investing. But even then, I mean, it's sort of all about you don't have to be flashy. You have to build up and learn. I think one of the key ideas I find really useful is the idea of iteration. And this is just me being a math nerd here, a very big topic there. So iteration is just, the idea you want to constantly improve. What you do first might not be, what you do first is never going to be what you end up doing. When I started tutoring, I was doing it in person, very messy sort of format. Compare it to how I'm doing it now, sort of this very organized, meticulous style, it's never the same. But the most important thing you can do is take that first step. You can never be discouraged because, the only outcomes you're ever going to have when you make a decision, when you act or not, you either learn or you succeed. Because when you fail, you learn. When you succeed, well, you succeed, right? So that first step is so important. There's this idea that I teach my students called sort of the 2-minute rule. It's the idea that if you're unmotivated to go to somewhere like a gym, the first thing you want to do, go down to your stairs or wherever your shoes are, put your 2 shoes on, walk outside your house, and you'll find that by the time you've walked outside your house, you do not want to turn back. So as a business owner, when you want to start a business, you put your shoes on, you walk outside your house, and you just get started. You're going to mess up, and you need to mess up. If you don't mess up, there's something wrong with you, right? So it's always about just getting started. I think you don't need to be overwhelmed by the tasks at hand. You don't need to be overwhelmed by not being the most flashy. It's just get started and go from there.
We don't let perfectionism get in the way, or the idea of, oh, it has to be a certain way before you start.
Of course.
Fantastic. Yeah, that already wraps up our interview. How can people get in touch? How can they find out more about you?
Of course. So the best way to get in touch is probably through our LinkedIn profile, Jones Tutoring Ltd, or LTD, all caps with a full stop at the end. On Instagram, we're called The Learning J, THELEARNINGJ. And from that point, you can just send me a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Otherwise, I'm sure we can sort out my email and phone number down below. But it's been a great conversation and it's been very enjoyable.
Thank you so much for all these fascinating insights. There were some really, really valuable nuggets in there. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much.